Call whoever you want. The millionaire mocked the elderly woman, sliding his phone across the polished wood. He didn't know it yet, but that single arrogant mistake was about to cost him a $400 million empire. But let's go back to where it all began. Because before that phone call triggered the ultimate corporate execution, there was a boardroom full of apex predators who looked right through a quiet woman. And that ghost had a name. Her name was Eleanor Pendelton. A faded plaid market bag rests on a slab of polished black walnut. The material is cheap woven plastic. Its handles are frayed. This object does not belong on the 50th floor of the city's most expensive commercial real estate. Yet, it sits dead center on the boardroom table. Beside it sits an elderly woman in a gray wool cardigan. Corporate boardrooms are engineered to intimidate. The ceiling height is mathematically calculated to make a person feel small. The climate control is permanently set 2 degrees colder than comfortable. It keeps minds sharp and visitors on edge. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a godlike view of the metropolis below. This architecture whispers about power. It dictates who belongs and who is merely passing through. Today, the room's carefully calibrated hierarchy is broken. 7 men and 2 women occupy the leather chairs around the perimeter. They wear bespoke wool suits. Their cuffs expose slivers of Swiss mechanical engineering. They radiate the aggressive confidence of apex predators. They are preparing for a hostile corporate takeover. Millions of dollars will change hands within the hour. Documents are stacked in precise geometric lines. Heavy fountain pens lie parallel to yellow legal pads. Everything is perfectly ordered. None of them look at the elderly woman. The executives employ a fascinating psychological defense mechanism. They look right through her. They stare at the panoramic glass. They study their manicured cuticles. They review the same acquisition clause for the 5th time. Acknowledging her presence would require an explanation. It would shatter the sterilized reality of their environment. So, they collectively agree upon a silent fiction. She does not exist. She is a ghost haunting a high-stakes financial ritual. In elite spaces, invisibility is usually reserved for the service staff. People carrying trays or wiping glass are trained to blend into the background. But this woman wears no uniform. She is a civilian occupying a militarized financial zone. This makes her presence an active threat to the established order. The woman does not fidget. People out of their element usually betray themselves through unnecessary movement. They adjust their collars. They check their screens. They shift their weight from side to side. She remains perfectly still. Her hands rest lightly on the table edge. The skin is thin, mapped with blue veins and pale age spots. They are the hands of someone who has worked the earth or kneaded dough. They rest millimeters away from a sleek tablet displaying fluctuating global stock indices. This heavy silence reveals the fragility of elite status. True power does not need to perform. The executives are performing. Their relaxed postures are rigid with suppressed physical tension. Their casual glances are meticulously timed. They are waiting for their lead negotiator to arrive and restore normalcy. They expect him to banish this anomaly. The market bag is a visual insult to their tailored world. It smells faintly of dried lavender and old paper. That organic scent cuts through the sterile, triple-filtered air of the skyscraper. The acoustics of the room deaden outside noise. You cannot hear the traffic sirens 50 stories down. You only hear the hum of the ventilation and the occasional rustle of heavy bond paper. The silence amplifies the awkwardness. Her attire tells a story of a different century. Her shoes are sensible, scuffed leather lace-ups. They rest firmly on a hand-tufted silk rug. That rug alone costs more than a standard suburban home. The juxtaposition is jarring. It creates a localized distortion in the room's social gravity. 15 minutes pass. The delay is intentional. The absent buyer is playing a classic dominance game. Make the target wait. Let them marinate in their own anxiety. But the tactic is backfiring today. The executives are not thinking about the buyout price. They are agonizing over the woven plastic bag. They are trapped in a social paradox. Calling security feels weak. Asking her to leave risks an unpredictable scene. Doing nothing feels like a complete loss of control. The woman blinks slowly. She looks at the men in their armor of expensive fabric. Her gaze holds no judgment. It holds no fear. It is the look of a museum patron observing a diorama behind heavy glass. She understands something they do not. The polished walnut table reflects the jagged skyline. It also reflects the frayed edges of her bag. The illusion of absolute corporate control is cracking. It fractures under the weight of an old woman sitting quietly in the wrong room. Julian Vance never wore a watch. Time was a weapon. Arriving exactly 22 minutes late was a calculated move. It forced the other side to wait. It forced them to doubt. It made them sweat. 22 minutes is the exact duration required to break a negotiator's focus. The first 5 minutes breed annoyance. The next 10 create anxiety. By minute 20, the waiting party begins to second-guess their own strategy. Vance perfected this psychological attrition. He waited in his idling town car downstairs. He watched the clock on the dashboard. He drank his espresso. He let the silence do the heavy lifting. He knew the exact temperature of the boardroom right now. He knew the air conditioning would feel too cold for the waiting executives. He knew their coffee would be turning bitter. He orchestrated these minor discomforts intentionally. Physical unease breeds mental mistakes. He wanted them exhausted before he even spoke his first word. He believed power was about controlling the atmosphere. He dictated the pace. He set the terms. He stepped out of the elevator. His mind was already drafting the press release. He was about to swallow a 70-year-old legacy. But predators often confuse a quiet forest with an empty one. Vance missed a crucial detail. He looked at the balance sheets. He ignored the bloodline. Overconfidence is a silent narcotic. It numbs the instincts. It creates a tunnel vision where only victory is visible. Vance suffered from this affliction. He stopped asking questions about risk. He only asked about timelines. His morning routine reflected this absolute certainty. He swam 50 laps. He reviewed the hostile takeover documents over breakfast. He did not look for flaws in his plan. He only admired its ruthlessness. He surrounded himself with agreeable subordinates. His analysts were terrified of delivering bad news. They fed him the data he wanted to hear. They confirmed his biases. This echo chamber was his true vulnerability. Vance built his empire on distressed assets. He bought, gutted, and sold. He viewed companies as carcasses. To him, Oakhaven Industries was just another decaying beast. The firm had patents, it had prime real estate, it had a temporary cash flow problem. That was enough. Vance deployed his capital like a scalpel. He bought up the debt. He cornered the board. He thought he held all the cards. His confidence was absolute. It was the arrogance of a man who only fought battles on paper. Oakhaven was not born in a boardroom. It started in a dusty garage in 1952. The founders forged steel and built engines. They survived recessions. They weathered market crashes. Their foundation was loyalty. Generations of workers passed through their gates. The current management looked weak to Wall Street. They refused to offshore production. They maintained high wages. Vance saw this as inefficiency. He saw a bloated ledger waiting to be trimmed. He failed to understand the currency of trust. The contrast was stark. Vance lived in quarterly projections. Oakhaven lived in decades. The company built turbines that powered entire cities. Their engineering was legendary. When a hurricane destroyed a coastal grid in 1998, Oakhaven dispatched teams for free. They rebuilt the infrastructure. They earned generational goodwill. That kind of equity does not appear on a financial statement. Vance's algorithms could not quantify it. His risk assessment models ignored it completely. He assumed money was the only language spoken in the corporate world. Corporate espionage in the modern era is sterile. It relies on scraped data and satellite imagery of factory parking lots. Vance's team tracked Oak Haven's supply chain shipments. They monitored the chief executive's flight logs. They built a flawless predictive model of the company's impending bankruptcy. But algorithms cannot scan human resolve. They cannot measure the weight of a handshake agreement made 40 years ago. This was his fatal error. He confused a temporary vulnerability with a terminal decline. The takeover plan was flawless in theory. Vance secured 51% of the voting rights. At least, that is what his legal team told him. He read the public filings. He missed the private covenants. Oak Haven was not just a business. It was a closed ecosystem. The original founder drafted a charter in 1971. It contained a unique legal provision. It was buried deep in the corporate bylaws. It was designed specifically to repel corporate raiders. It activated only under extreme duress. Vance's lawyers skimmed the archives. They relied on digital summaries. They never read the original yellowed parchment. They missed the clause regarding unlisted preferred shares. They missed the dormant voting block. Vance walked down the glass corridor. His leather shoes made no sound on the thick carpet. The hallway outside the boardroom was lined with portraits. Black and white photographs of engineers hung on the walls. Men and women in hard hats stared back at him. Blueprints of early prototypes were framed in oak. Vance walked past them without a single glance. He had no respect for history. He only respected leverage. His tailored suit acted as armor. His posture projected absolute dominance. He mentally divided Oak Haven's assets. The real estate in the valley would be sold to commercial developers. The patent portfolio would be auctioned to overseas competitors. The employee pension fund would be dissolved and absorbed. He calculated his personal bonus. It was a staggering 8-figure sum. He approached the boardroom doors. His assistants flanked him like bodyguards. They carried briefcases full of termination agreements. They held the restructuring plans. Vance reached for the brass handle. He smiled. It was the smile of a man stepping onto a trapdoor. He believed he was the apex predator. He forgot that the oldest wolves know the terrain better than anyone. He placed his hand on the heavy wood. He paused for one final second. He adjusted his silk tie. He prepared to deliver the killing blow. He was completely unaware that the room he was about to enter was not a surrender site. It was an execution chamber designed specifically for him. A single mocking phrase can dismantle a billion-dollar acquisition faster than any market crash. Julian Vance leaned back in his leather chair. He adjusted his silk cuffs. He considered the merger complete. The opposing board members looked defeated. The contracts lay on the mahogany table. Only the final bureaucratic formality remained: the legal verification of shareholders. Corporate law demands absolute transparency at the exact moment of asset transfer. The lead attorney began reading the capitalization table. This process is not merely ceremonial. It is a strict legal firewall. Every percentage point of equity requires a physical presence or a certified proxy. The room must mathematically account for 100% of the company. Vance tapped his gold pen against the wood. He was impatient. He viewed this protocol as a tedious delay. His mind was already drafting the morning press release. He completely ignored the quiet woman sitting at the far corner of the room. She had no nameplate. She wore a simple gray blazer. Vance's brain immediately categorized her as a junior paralegal. He assumed she was there to take notes or fetch coffee. This cognitive blind spot would soon cost him his entire reputation. The attorney reached the largest block of shares. 42% of the target company belonged to an offshore holding trust. The corresponding signature line was completely blank. Vance stopped tapping his pen. He demanded an immediate resolution. He directed his frustration at the opposing chief executive. The executive remained silent. He looked down at his hands. The room grew incredibly tense. The woman in the gray blazer finally spoke. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated that the holding trust had not authorized the sale. Her tone was purely informative. She presented a hard, legal fact. She did not seek permission to speak. She did not apologize for the interruption. Vance snapped. His ego could not process a direct challenge from an unverified subordinate. He leaned forward. He aggressively invaded the collective space of the table. He asked her who let the secretarial staff into a closed executive session. The room froze. The opposing board members did not defend her. They simply watched the scene unfold. Vance doubled down on his aggression. He wanted a public display of absolute dominance. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket. He pulled out his personal smartphone. He slid it across the polished wood. The device stopped exactly in front of the woman. He told her to pick it up. He suggested she call her supervisor. He offered her the chance to call the board of directors. He even mocked her to call the federal regulators. He declared that the deal was happening today, regardless of her minor paperwork issues. This was the fatal error. Vance broke the cardinal rule of high-stakes negotiations. He made a massive assumption without verifying the data. He let his pride override his situational awareness. He voluntarily handed over the initiative to an unknown entity. In corporate warfare, true power never announces itself loudly. It sits quietly. It observes the environment. It waits for the opponent to overextend their reach. Vance provided the perfect opening. His public insult was not just highly unprofessional, it was a tactical surrender. He gave an unknown variable explicit permission to introduce new information into the room. The woman looked at the phone. She did not touch it. She looked back at Vance. Her expression remained completely neutral. She did not show any anger. She did not show any embarrassment. Her absolute calmness amplified Vance's sudden loss of composure. The silence in the room shifted from expectant to heavy. It became suffocating. Vance had spent 6 months planning this hostile takeover. He had analyzed decades of financial statements. He had mapped out complex global supply chains. He had hired the most expensive consultants. He had done absolutely everything except identify the actual human being who controlled the offshore trust. He assumed the trust was a blind shell entity managed by a proxy firm. He never considered that the ultimate beneficial owner might attend the final meeting in person. He never imagined she would dress so plainly. By offering his phone, Vance initiated a destructive sequence he could no longer stop. He demanded a phone call. He was about to get one. The rigid bureaucratic procedure of shareholder verification had collided violently with raw human arrogance. The procedure always wins. Documents do not have fragile egos. Contracts do not feel insulted by harsh words. They simply execute their written terms. Vance watched the woman reach into her own leather bag. She bypassed his phone entirely. She retrieved a plain black device. The lead attorney suddenly stopped looking at his legal papers. He looked directly at the woman. Pure recognition dawned on his face. The color instantly drained from his cheeks. Vance noticed this visceral reaction. A cold realization began to form in the back of his mind. The grand illusion of his victory started to crack. The woman dialed a single number. The irreversible mechanism of destruction was now fully active. The echo of Julian Vance's laughter died against the glass walls. The boardroom expected a reaction, a blush of humiliation, a hasty retreat. Instead, The gray-haired woman remained perfectly still. She reached into her worn leather tote. She retrieved a plain black smartphone. No gold casing, no corporate logos, just a tool. She dialed a direct international line. The room watched. The silence stretched. It turned from triumphant to heavy. Vance leaned back. He adjusted his silk tie. He intended to project amusement. His tapping fingers betrayed a sudden spike of adrenaline. The call connected. The woman did not introduce herself. She did not raise her voice. "Execute Protocol Delta," she said. "Freeze the escrow accounts. Yes, all 7 of them." Vance's lead counsel stopped breathing. Escrow accounts were the lifeblood of this merger. Only 3 people knew the exact structure of those 7 accounts. 2 were in this room. The third was the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. "Notify the compliance director at Vance Trust," she continued. "The acquisition is hostile and fraudulent. Initiate the clawback." Gravity in the room shifted. It no longer centered on Vance at the head of the mahogany table. It anchored entirely on the seated woman. True power never shouts. It whispers instructions that dismantle empires. The junior analyst stopped typing. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards ceased. The silence became a physical weight. It pressed against the eardrums of every executive present. Vance opened his mouth to speak. No sound came out. The psychological architecture of his dominance collapsed. He had built his strategy on intimidation. Intimidation requires a susceptible target. This woman was a void. She absorbed his aggression without a single ripple. A corporate takeover relies on momentum. It is an avalanche of paperwork. It is a storm of legal threats and manufactured inevitability. The woman paused the avalanche with a 15-second phone call. She severed the financial arteries of the deal. She placed the phone face down on the table. The soft click echoed like a gavel strike. "You have no authority," Vance finally managed to say. His voice lacked its previous resonance. It sounded thin. The woman looked at him. She did not offer a counter-argument. She offered a timeline. "In exactly 4 minutes, your access cards will stop working," she stated. "Your corporate servers are currently locking down. The board of directors at your parent company received my authorization code 30 seconds ago." The lead counsel frantically tapped his own phone screen. His complexion turned a pale shade of ash. The network signal was gone. The internal corporate network had vanished. Panic in elite spaces does not look like a street riot. It is microscopic. It is the sudden dilation of pupils. It is the swallowing of dry throats. It is the realization that the predator has just become the prey. Vance looked at his legal team. He found no reassurance. They were staring at the woman. They recognized the executioner's calm. She was not fighting for a seat at the table. She owned the building. In every room, there is a visible hierarchy and an invisible one. Vance represented the visible. Expensive suits, loud voices, aggressive posture. The woman embodied the invisible. The apex of the financial food chain operates in absolute quiet. They do not negotiate. They dictate reality. The air conditioning hummed. It was the only sound left. The legal team exchanged terrified glances. They mentally calculated their personal liabilities. A clawback meant personal asset freezes. It meant federal audits. The woman had bypassed the legal battle entirely. She had gone straight for the infrastructure of their wealth. Her voice lacked any inflection. It was the tone of a dispatcher routing a train. Routine, inevitable. This mundane delivery amplified the terror. If she were angry, Vance could have fought back. Anger is an emotion. Emotion is a vulnerability. Cold execution offers no surface to strike. She adjusted her reading glasses. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her bag. It was not a contract. It was a termination notice. "Who are you?" Vance whispered. The arrogance was gone. Only raw, unfiltered fear remained. The woman did not answer immediately. She let the silence do the work. Silence is the most aggressive weapon in negotiation. It forces the opponent to fill the void with their own insecurities. Vance's mind raced through every enemy he had made. He thought of every corner he had cut over the last 12 years. He was drowning in his own unsaid confessions. The lead counsel slowly slid his legal pad away. He placed his gold pen down. The metallic click was deafening. It was the sound of a mercenary dropping his weapon. He looked at Vance. The look contained no loyalty. It contained only self-preservation. Vance's empire was built on perception. He was the unstoppable force, the visionary disruptor. That perception shattered the moment the network dropped. The illusion required connectivity. It required the constant flow of digital capital. The woman had unplugged him. The junior analysts began quietly closing their laptops. It was an unconscious surrender. They were distancing themselves from Vance. The pack mentality shifted instantly. The alpha had been dethroned without a single drop of blood being spilled. "I am the architect of the trust you tried to dismantle," she finally replied. "And you are trespassing." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. A courier stepped onto the thick carpet. He wore a damp gray jacket. The contrast with the bespoke Italian suits around the mahogany table was jarring. He carried a single, unmarked manila envelope. Inside lay a secret from 1978, a secret capable of dismantling a $400 million acquisition in seconds. The courier bypassed Julian Vance completely. He walked straight to the quiet woman seated at the far end of the table. She signed the digital pad without looking up. The electronic beep echoed sharply in the tense room. Vance adjusted his silk tie. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had spent 8 months structuring this hostile takeover. He owned 51% of the voting shares. His legal team had assured him the victory was absolute. The woman sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. She extracted a stack of yellowed, notarized pages. These were not modern corporate filings. They were original articles of incorporation, typed on a manual machine. Signed in faded blue ink by the late founder, Eleanor Pendelton. Vance leaned forward. His lead attorney reached for the documents. The woman slid a single sheet across the polished wood. Pendleton had started his engineering firm in a small, unheated garage. Everyone knew that corporate legend. Few knew about his very first investor. It was a local machinist union pension fund. They provided the crucial seed capital. In exchange, Pendleton drafted a highly specific, irrevocable covenant, Clause 47. It stated that any hostile transfer of majority ownership automatically triggered a massive dilution of voting rights. The original Class A shares would instantly convert to Class C. Vance's lawyers began reading. Their faces lost color rapidly. The math was absolute. The moment Vance purchased his 51% on the open market, the trap snapped shut. His shares were automatically reclassified. His voting power plummeted from 51% to barely 14%. The remaining 86% of voting authority reverted to the founder's designated trust. The exact trust currently managed by the quiet woman sitting opposite him. The colorful spreadsheets projected on the glass wall became meaningless. The months of aggressive market plays, the leveraged buyouts, the intimidation tactics. All of it was neutralized by a 40-year-old legal mechanism. Vance had bought a hollow shell. He owned the financial liability, but zero operational control. The multi-million-dollar predator had just locked himself in a cage of his own making. Modern due diligence relies heavily on digital databases. Algorithms scan thousands of pages for specific keywords. Vance's team used the most expensive legal software available. They looked for standard poison pills. They searched for golden parachutes. They completely missed the analog ghost in the machine. Clause 47 was never digitized properly. It existed only in the physical archives of the state registry, a forgotten paper artifact from a pre-internet era. The woman watched Vance process the new reality. He was a man accustomed to bending boardrooms to his will. He used volume, posture, and capital as blunt weapons. Now, those weapons were useless against simple arithmetic. The document on the table was a mathematical certainty. 14% cannot dictate terms to 86%. His lead attorney whispered frantically into his ear. Vance shoved the man away. He grabbed the yellowed paper. His eyes scanned the typewritten text. The ink was faded. The legal phrasing was archaic and dense. Yet, the binding power was absolute. Pendleton had anticipated a corporate predator exactly like Vance. The founder had engineered his company exactly like he engineered his famous suspension bridges. With hidden load-bearing structures designed to withstand extreme external pressure, the silence in the room changed texture. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of Vance's intimidation. It was the cold, sterile vacuum of his total defeat. The millions spent on aggressive stock acquisition were now trapped capital. He could not liquidate his position without the board's explicit approval. He could not change the board without majority votes. He was legally and financially paralyzed. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was flat, devoid of any triumph or gloating. She simply explained the new mathematical reality. Vance's financial investment was secure, but his executive authority was gone. He was now a silent, powerless partner in a company he had intended to gut and sell for parts. The grand illusion of his supremacy shattered against the hard, unforgiving edge of contract law. The meticulous plan, the aggressive timeline, the arrogant late arrivals. Every single action he took over the past year had only accelerated his own entrapment. The math was flawless. The collapse was complete. Defeat rarely announces itself with explosions. It usually arrives in absolute silence. Julian Vance sat frozen at the head of the mahogany table. The crisp legal documents lay before him. They contained a simple, mathematical truth. 51% of the voting shares belonged to the quiet woman at the far end of the room. His hostile takeover was dead. His months of aggressive maneuvering had just evaporated. Eleanor Pendelton did not smile. She did not lean forward to claim her victory. Performative triumph is for those who doubt their own strength. True power requires no applause. It only demands compliance with reality. She slowly folded her reading glasses. The soft click of the frames echoed like a gavel strike in the silent room. Julian's team of high-priced lawyers stared at their laptops. Their screens were filled with useless strategies. They had prepared for a corporate war. They were defeated by a ghost. Eleanor picked up her worn canvas bag. Next to it, the sleek designer briefcases of the executives looked like plastic toys. "You audited our accounts, Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm and steady. "You counted the shipping fleets. You appraised the downtown real estate. You calculated the profit margins down to the last cent." She paused, letting the words settle. "But you failed to understand what you were buying." She stood up. The gesture shifted the entire center of gravity in the room. "My grandfather did not build an asset. He built a promise. He shook hands with suppliers when the banks refused to lend. He kept workers on the payroll during 3 separate recessions. You saw a balance sheet ready to be liquidated. I see a lineage." Julian opened his mouth to speak. No sound came out. The arrogance that had fueled him for 40 years was entirely drained. He had walked into this glass tower expecting a coronation. He was now attending his own professional funeral. "Wealth makes noise," Eleanor continued. She walked slowly toward the exit. It wears expensive watches. It arrives late to meetings to establish dominance. It raises its voice to ensure it is heard. She stopped with her hand on the heavy steel handle of the door. Power does none of those things. Power simply holds the pen. She pushed the door open. She did not look back. Looking back implies a need for validation. The heavy glass swung shut behind her. The click of the latch sealed the fate of everyone left inside. The boardroom remained paralyzed. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It cast long, harsh shadows across the polished wood. The illusion of Julian's invincibility was shattered. He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. The air conditioning hummed softly. It was the only sound left in the executive suite. Julian's carefully constructed reality was disintegrating. He had built his reputation on hostile acquisitions. He stripped companies down to their copper wiring. He sold the pieces to the highest bidder. He considered himself an apex predator. Today, he discovered he was just a scavenger trespassing on a sanctuary. Eleanor's words hung in the cold air. They were not a reprimand. They were a statement of fact. Legacy is not a line item on a tax return. It is the invisible architecture of a business. It is the loyalty of a community. Julian had tried to sever those roots with a fountain pen. He failed to realize those roots reached deeper than his credit line. The junior executives in the room experienced a profound paradigm shift. They had been taught to worship aggression. They read books on power dynamics. They practiced power poses in the mirror. Eleanor Pendelton dismantled their entire worldview in less than 5 minutes. She did it without raising her heart rate. Julian stared at the empty chair at the end of the table. The cheap canvas bag was gone. The woman who owned the building, the brand, and his immediate future had vanished. She left no instructions. She demanded no apologies. Her silence was the ultimate punishment. It forced Julian to sit alone with his own profound inadequacy. He had spent his entire career mastering the art of intimidation. He used aggressive deadlines. He deployed army-sized legal teams. He manipulated market rumors. Today, all those weapons failed against a woman who simply knew her exact worth. She possessed the ultimate leverage. She had nothing to prove. The corporate game would continue tomorrow. Stocks would rise and fall, but the men in this room would never be the same. They had witnessed the raw, unpolished face of absolute authority. It did not wear a bespoke suit. It did not need to shout. It simply arrived, corrected the math, and walked away. You cannot bully gravity. You cannot intimidate mathematics. The quietest person in the room is often the only one holding the keys.